is at a different time, at a later time. Whichever way you're watching, we're really excited to bring this event to you tonight. An event that explores the question, is Christianity still relevant? Now it's 2021, right? So it's been some time since Jesus walked the earth. You might have heard the phrase, Jesus was either a liar, a lunatic, or Lord. And we need to answer that question. And the question that remains then is what he said true? And if it is it still relevant? These are some of the questions we're going to get into tonight, and we'd love to hear your thoughts about that and answer some of your questions. So it's going to be an interactive night. Now, we're not entirely sure who you are tuning in. Perhaps you came from a Christian family and you're sitting thinking, is this still relevant to my life? Maybe you are on the fence, or what we might call agnostic, someone who's thinking, look, there could be some kind of higher power. I like to say things like the universe did XYZ, or maybe you believe in fate or chance, but you're not quite ready to call it God, and you're not quite sure what your relationship with this higher power is. Perhaps you come from a different faith tradition. Maybe you grew up in Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, or any other number of faith traditions. Or maybe you think the idea of a God who created the world to be silly and anti-science. Maybe you're not sure what you think. There are a number of different possibilities or reasons you came to be here tonight, and whatever those are, we're really glad to be here with you. Now, while we'd love to be in a room having a dialogue back and forth with you, we know that that's not possible tonight. What is, though, is a bit of a choose-your-own-adventure night. So it's up to you how you engage tonight. Perhaps you're watching along with someone else and you want to have a conversation with them. Maybe you know someone else watching and you want to do a virtual meet. You could tune in together by Zoom, Google Meets, FaceTime, any other number of ways we've all become pretty pro at logging in on now because of our lockdown. Whatever way you want to engage, that's okay tonight. We would encourage you, if you want to get the most out of it, to be shooting some questions through Slido, which I'll show you how to log into soon. If you're someone who's sitting thinking, I need a bit of time to process, I'm not really someone who likes to walk into a room, well, tonight can be great for you too. You can sit back and watch, mull it over and have a think. And then at the end of the evening, we're going to pop up a QR code where you'll be able to log on to a Google form. In that form, you'll be able to put up some things like maybe you want to meet someone in a COVID-safe way and go for a walk and have a conversation. Perhaps you want to send an email. Maybe you want a text or a phone call. Or maybe you just want us to send you some more information. You'll be able to do that in the Google slide at the end of the night. So how's it going to work tonight? Well, first things first, we're going to jump on into Slido. A slide's going to pop up now, which will show you how to log in. While you're doing that, I'll let you know what's coming up. So pop your phone up to that QR code so that you can sign into Slido. And as the night goes on, you'll be able to still use that login to ask questions, make comments, seek any kind of clarification. And we'd love for you to be doing that as the night progresses. Then when we hit the end, we'll be able to answer your questions. So what's going to happen? Michael, who's our lead pastor here at Salt Church, he's going to jump up. We're going to get to know him in just a minute. And then he's going to give a reasonably brief to jump on in. Michael, I might get you to jump on up here and we'll have a little chat and get to know you a little bit.
G'day Jess.
Hey,
welcome
Michael,
everyone.
how you
Great
doing?
to be here. Wish we could be in person, but here we are.
That's
in
it.
9th week of lockdown.
It is, isn't it? It's been
Still
going on
smiling.
for quite a while. Right before we jump in to get to know you, Michael, I want to get people to do a little bit of a quick check of Slido. One of those questions I'm going to ask you too, but before I do, if you want to jump on there to Slido, the first question we're going to ask you is, which is the world's widest river? Now, would you know the answer to that? I don't think I'd know the answer to that. But we'll see if anyone does. We'll give you a minute to answer that question.
World's widest river. Not longest, but widest.
Is the Mississippi River wide?
I think try again, Jess.
I don't know. I know the Mississippi River has a really big long road on it because I've been on that.
Okay, no.
Which is the world's widest
There's
river?
2 more large rivers in the world.
The Nile?
The Nile's one and the...
What's the one that boat got stuck in? It was a channel. Yeah, there you go. Channel, not a river.
Not that wide.
Geography is not my strong
There's
point.
the Amazon.
The Amazon. That's true. There is the
Might be a
Amazon.
bit of a hint there.
That might be. Maybe it's that one. Have we got any answers coming on through there? Oh, we do.
It's not in Australia, we know that.
No, that's right. Now I'm going to hand over the iPad, which has now logged us out, to try and get some of those answers to come up. And while I do that, I'm going to ask you one more question.
Mm-hmm.
And the next question, as well as forwards, hummingbirds can fly straight, up and down, sideways and backwards. True or false? I'm just going to pop this to someone who can log back in for me.
Sure, go for it. The hummingbird. That would be an awesome thing to be able to do.
And I think we did get the Amazon, which was,
Amazon?
as you said,
Good.
and true, as you
good.
have also.
So far, so
you're
good.
doing pretty well, which is good, considering you're the one giving the information tonight. It's good that you know the general knowledge questions as well.
School.
That's right. We have one more question for you. And that's, what is the land area of Japan? It's very nature/geography focused tonight.
That's right. And that one, I have no idea on.
No, neither do I.
Other than Japan's not that
I mean,
big.
someone said 377. I mean, you could probably, if you're sitting at home watching, you can certainly Google this and help us out a little by writing the correct answer.
The 377.
That's right. All right. The last question that we have is one that I'd like you to answer. And if anyone listening along home would like to answer it too, you're certainly welcome to. Michael, tell us, what is something that you didn't know you needed until you had it?
Yeah. I thought about that question, and I think the answer is my wife.
Your wife?
Yeah. I think she's a great gift to me, and I just don't know whether I would have ever imagined having that gift. So, yeah. Yep.
Natalie, I hope you're blushing. It's a very nice... She didn't know that question was coming, so we can't even say that she prepped you for that one.
No, she didn't.
That one's all you.
I thought about it all myself. Yeah.
There you go. Well done. There's certainly brownie points in the answer to that question, isn't there?
Yeah.
All right. So let's get to know you a little bit, Michael. Tell us, you turned 50 in the week just gone. Tell us something you got for your birthday.
Thanks for giving away my age.
Yep. No worries. Hey, I could have said something. I could have made anything up.
That's
people might have believed me.
A birthday beginning with 5 and ending in 0 is the way I like to put it.
There you go.
Yeah. Had a great time. My girls spoilt me, so I've got 3 teenage girls. And they just get better every year at putting on something special for us in our birthdays. And they gave me a stand-up paddleboard this year. And I've
Very good.
got to use it in Wollongong Harbour, embarrass myself publicly in the harbour this week. So that was good.
And did you fall off?
I did.
You did?
Good.
And did anyone film that?
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. There we go. Well, someone else can't live without their air fryer or their washing machine.
Okay. Air fryers?
Yeah. Air fryer. I've given the gift of an air fryer, but not received one.
I've heard they're very useful.
I've heard this. I have heard this as well. Tell us a little bit something else about you. What did you want to be when you were a kid?
Growing up, a builder or an architect. I don't know whether I really knew what that meant.
You just liked the sound of it?
Yeah, I just liked the sound of it. And a good friend of our family, an uncle to our family, so to speak, he kept giving me presents at Christmas that were Lego sets of houses.
Oh, yeah.
And I just loved putting those together.
Yes.
And I thought, well, that's pretty much what a builder does, isn't it? So
puts together Lego. Any builders out there, all you do is Lego.
That's it.
You've heard it here first.
That's what I thought. So I thought that sounds good to me.
Yeah, that's right. And tell me, what's one of the most curious things or habits or things that you've done in lockdown, or maybe habits that you've formed?
I've started smoking meat.
Oh,
not
good.
smoking.
There was a little bit of a pause there.
Yeah. Just because it takes a long time, and you need to be at home.
You do.
It takes 3, 4, 7 hours.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a great hobby, useful for the family.
What particular cuts of meat?
What have we done? We've done pork. We've done a lamb shoulder. I started with the cheap meat chickens.
Yes.
So if I ruin it,
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. So that's what we've experimented with.
Oh,
so far.
good. I hope your family's been enjoying that.
Yeah.
You'll be prepped and ready once lockdown's finished to have a smokehouse party.
Experiment on the family first.
That's it. Lucky them. Last question that I have for you is, when did you come to know Jesus?
Okay.
And before you answer that, because I'm going to double barrel you here.
Yeah.
What have you had doubts about that along the way?
Thinking about that question, I reckon I grew up almost all my childhood really trying to work out whether Christianity is true, and if it was, why didn't my parents believe it? Why didn't a lot of adults believe it around me? And yet there were adults in my life, even at school, I thought they are really convinced and they are really changed. And so that got me curious. I was really curious and attracted to and impressed by Christian community as a teenager. So somewhere along that journey, I became a Christian.
Yeah, right.
I think it was probably at university I worked out, this explains the world really well. As I thought about that, I looked at the Bible more. And I think it was probably a little bit later than that, I actually realised, well, it's historically very robust. And so all of those things have come together as an adult.
Yeah, Jesus is a real person.
All of that kind of thing. But it was certainly a journey all the way through childhood. Have I had doubts? I've definitely had doubts. Doubts about, is it true? Is it historically true? Am I just imagining God? What about when terrible things happen to people? What's God doing about that? There's been a lot of questions along the way, and I think it's been part of the journey of discovery. And I think doubts are really helpful because they really get you to think hard about what the answers are, and not to... You come out the other side, I think, more convinced, or not.
Or not, yeah.
So I was more convinced, but I think that's the helpfulness of doubts.
Well, it makes you have to wrestle, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And give reason for why it is you believe what you believe.
Yeah.
Which, what a segue. That's what you're going to do now.
Absolutely.
I'm going to leave us. Michael's going to have a chat to you for the next 15 or so minutes and give a little bit of an overview, I suppose, of why you think Christianity is relevant. All right? I'll catch you back in a minute.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jess. Well, welcome to tonight. Is Christianity still relevant? That's the question we're looking at. Now, a lot of people would say Christianity isn't relevant, or it's as relevant as, here's my attempt at humour, an ashtray on a motorbike, a screen door on a submarine, or an inflatable dartboard. It's good to get those jokes out of the way. But seriously, I can understand why you might think Christianity is no longer relevant. In our part of the world, it can feel a bit like Christianity is a religion of yesteryear, a bit outdated, a bit dusty, full of old people, full of people doing religious things, thinking in a way that we don't think anymore. Actually part of a world that we don't belong to anymore, a world that's moved on. And many of you might be thinking, it's okay for some, but I don't see any relevance to me. It doesn't seem to have any relevance at all to my life. In fact, you might be like a lot of Aussies who are no less spiritual than they've ever been. They know there's a God, but they wouldn't call themselves Christian. They certainly wouldn't tick the Christian box at the census. I reckon we've actually lost a lot of trust in religion, and kind of rightly so. As you think about the scandals, you think about the abuse in some churches, it's kind of right that we're sceptical about religion and even Christianity. Or maybe it's that it's what you've heard about Christianity. Maybe it's that you've heard that Christianity is all about rules, really strict rules, a religion that's just kind of way too rigid, way too controlling, even judgmental, even harmful, even oppressive. There's lots of things, lots of reasons why we might think Christianity is no longer relevant. But can I say, if you've felt any of these, I just want to say I sympathise with you. If that's what Christianity is about, I understand why you'd think it's irrelevant. In fact, I would want nothing to do with Christianity if that's what Christianity is really about. I'd be up here speaking against Christianity, stronger than anyone. But can I say, the good news is that none of those things are what Christianity is about. The key to understanding and seeing something profoundly different, massively relevant, and extraordinarily good about Christianity is understanding who was at the centre of Christianity. See, Christianity at its heart, it's not a philosophy, it's not like Buddhism, or it's not a code of morals like Islam, it's not even a set of rituals, as some Christian churches have presented Christianity. It's not even about being a good person, thank goodness for that. It's not about attending church. See, at the centre of Christianity is a person, and that person is Jesus Christ. In fact, Christianity, you could say, is all about responding to Jesus. In the short time we have tonight, I want to say three things about Jesus. Three things about Jesus that I think make him incredibly relevant and I think worthy of you exploring him further. The first thing I want to say is that Jesus is a hugely influential figure on the landscape of history. That means you won't understand Christianity properly if you don't understand the person of Jesus as he's revealed himself in history. In fact, many historians would say you won't understand Western culture if you don't understand Jesus. See, central to Christianity is God revealing himself to us so that we might have a relationship with him. Revealing himself to us in the person, a real person, in history, in the person of Jesus, at a particular point in time, at a particular place. That is, if you lived in Palestine 2,000 years ago, you would have seen Jesus, you would have heard Jesus, you would have touched Jesus. You would have seen his miracles. But how do we know that that is the case? How are we to be in touch with the real Jesus of history? Well, we know because of the historically reliable documents that have been passed down to us. That's how we know anything in history. There's two places those documents come from if we're going to know Jesus. The first one is within the Bible, but also, as you'd expect if it's true, and this is unique to Christianity, some of the sources come from outside of the Bible. So within the Bible, we have 4 historically accurate biographies of Jesus' life. We call them the 4 Gospels in the Bible: Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. So a lot of detail there from Jesus' birth to his death and resurrection. But we also have historical sources, documents, outside of the Bible. History is written not by Christians, but historians of the day. People like Josephus and Cornelius Tacitus. They had great names in those days, didn't they? They make our names look boring. Historians from the 1st and 2nd century, and there are others, and they are extraordinary sources because they confirm the details of the Bible. And we don't have time to go into the details of those documents tonight, but that's something you might want to discover for yourself as you think about, is Jesus a real historical person? But let me just say to you briefly, if we had no other copies of the Bible, if all the copies of the Bible in the world were destroyed, we would know a lot about Jesus. We would still know a lot about Jesus. We would know when he lived, where he lived, that he was Jewish, that he assumed the role of a public teacher, that he attracted great crowds, that he engaged in activities thought to be supernatural, that he was executed on a cross, he was crucified. We'd know when he was crucified and by whom, that he had a brother James who was subsequently executed, that people claim to have seen Jesus alive after his death. And we'd also know that Jesus was known by the prestigious Jewish title, the Christ. And so what all that means is you can know the real Jesus who lived and died and rose again. You can know that Jesus with certainty. But it's more than that. It's bigger than that. The second thing I want to say is the claims of Jesus are massive. Jesus makes some really, really big claims. So Jesus claimed to be God, come in the flesh. Jesus said he was the Messiah. Jesus said, if you know me, you know God. In fact, you can only know God through me. Jesus said, I can give you life and life to the full. He meant life now, but also eternal life. But here's the cracker. He said, only I can give you life. Why is Jesus relevant? Well, I reckon he's relevant because he answers our deepest questions with these huge claims. Who are we? Why are we here? Now, his answers are very satisfying, but here's where it gets really relevant. Jesus says, I've overcome death, and you can overcome death as well if you trust me. That is a huge claim. Now, there's a beautiful moment in the life of Jesus recorded for us in John's biography. In chapter 11, there's a woman named Martha. She lives in Bethany. It's about 2 miles outside of Jerusalem. John records for us she's just lost her brother. There's terrible grief. It's an awful scene. It's that scene when you step into a household and someone's just lost the love of their life. And it's the moment that John records for us, Jesus crying. Jesus wept. Jesus, full of the horror of death, knows there's something desperately wrong with our world for this to happen. And Jesus brings her brother back to life, but he says something huge to her. He says something much bigger than the moment. Much bigger than her brother coming back to life. And I'm struck by this every time I read it. Jesus says these words, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Jesus says, do you believe this? Now that is a massive claim. That is a massively good claim. How good would it be that death is not the end, that Jesus has conquered it, that there is a world to come? I was staggered when I first heard that from Jesus. I'm still staggered as I listen to those words. Now, you might be someone who doesn't think much about death. You might, if you're young, that's not the kind of thing that you would think about. But even if you're older, it's kind of the unmentionable, isn't it, to talk about death? Try talking about death next time you get together with a group of friends or a dinner party when we're allowed to do those kind of things. It goes down like a lead balloon, doesn't it? We don't want to talk about death, but it's a very relevant topic. 1 in 1 people will die. Death has a 100% strike rate. It's a very relevant question. Now, you might not have thought much about death, but here's something I'd be surprised if you hadn't thought much of, and that is the state of our world. We live in a beautiful world, don't we? We live in a beautiful part of the world here in the Illawarra. But as you look at the world, I'd be surprised if you don't agree with this. There is something wrong with the world. There's something desperately wrong with the world. Our relationships can be good, but they're not perfect. They're far from perfect, and sometimes they go horribly wrong. Our environment is amazing, and yet it's suffering from decay. As human beings, we can treat each other with enormous kindness and love, and we can also treat one another with terrible cruelty and brutality. Here we are in our part of the world, most of us living in plenty, but there are millions living in poverty. I reckon COVID has said to us, even in this part of the world, a comfortable part of the world, there's something not right about our world. And it's completely right to ask the question, why is it like this? I mean, is it the case that the intricate beauty of the world is just a cosmic accident? Is there actually no meaning to life, no purpose? Is atheism right? And if atheism is right, then suffering too has no rhyme or reason. It just is. And if you suffer, you've drawn the short straw. Probably the most famous contemporary atheist, Richard Dawkins, said these words: "In a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces and genetic replication, I find that incredibly cruel and without hope." Jesus, on the other hand, makes some massively good claims, does he not? He says, "I am the resurrection and the life. Everyone who comes to me will live." See, Jesus says he's come to restore the world, to save the world, to actually build a new and beautiful world, to fix the world, not with a band-aid solution, but to fix it fully and finally. And he does it in a way that's not just a pipe dream. It's actually something that he's given proof to. He's actually turned up and proven it in his miracles, proven it in his death and his resurrection. And he promises anyone who comes to him will have this life. Anyone who comes to him seeking his forgiveness. That's what he came for. That's what his death was about. See, we so misunderstand Jesus. He didn't come as a moral policeman. He came to save us, to forgive us. He didn't come so that we, in some way, that we need to be good enough for him. He came to bring us forgiveness. Now, if all of that is amazing, if it's true. There's nothing more relevant to the claims of Jesus if it's true. There's so much at stake, isn't there? And the key question, I think, is it true? Is Jesus who he said he was? Is he for real? Is Jesus a real person in history? Are the extraordinary claims he made true? Now, we're going to explore that further now in a Q&A session, and we'd love to help you make progress on those questions. You might even have a question tonight. We'd love to help you out with that, or maybe there's other ways that we could help you on that journey. Let me encourage you to think into Jesus, his person, what he has done, what he has said, the claims he's made. But can I finish with this? A third reason why I think Jesus is relevant, actually personally relevant to each and every one of us, and that is his offer to us of eternal life has a time limit on it. Jesus talked about a final day when we will face God either as friends or as enemies, either as forgiven or unforgiven, either part of that beautiful restored world or not. And so the way we respond to Jesus now is vitally important. There could be nothing more important than working out what did Jesus say? How can I have this eternal life? How can I be friends with the God who made the universe before that last day? So I want to encourage you to keep working it out. And I'm going to hand back to Jess, and we're going to go into a Q&A session.
Thanks, Michael. Good to hear from you. Well, that was interesting. I think you talked about, it's a difficult topic to cover in any amount of time,
sure.
let alone a brief talk.
Yeah.
So I guess you covered, talking about the state of our world right now, about the history of Christianity, about the man of Christ, the person who that was, and the historical accuracy, I guess, is what you talked about in terms of how can we know that this person existed, and if we're only looking at the place that he said to look.
Sure.
And what you talked about is actually there are other sources outside of the Bible that, add to the veracity of those claims. I guess one of the things I was thinking about, and we're going to move into Q&A, so if you've got any questions or comments as we go along, please keep popping them through, and we'll come to them in a minute, is I was thinking about referendums, And you know when the government wants to know something, they ask the people, right? And could you say then that the census is a bit that way, similar? If we want to know something, we ask the people. And if Christianity is declining, potentially, and I guess we'll see more about that after the next census, does that not tell us about relevancy in this, at least in this part of the world?
Sure. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's interesting, the census figures, isn't it? So I've no doubt when the census figures come out, the number of people who've ticked Christian will be less. The number of people who've ticked no religion, I think that was one of the categories, will be greater. What does that say? I think some of that, just from a social perspective, says that we are quite comfortable. There was a time, decades ago, where I think a lot of Aussies were prepared to tick Christian, knew God was there, knew Jesus was real, believed in the resurrection, but really didn't take it that seriously. It really didn't act on it. I don't think that group of people has necessarily changed, but they're much happier to tick no religion, where they used to tick religion.
Yeah.
And so I think if you talk to the average person on the street, they're still spiritual. They still know God's there. They might have a different view. I mean, of course, we're much more multicultural, so there's a whole lot of other religions as well. So I think that's what that census data is telling us.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know if that answers it.
Yeah, no, I guess it makes a bit of sense in saying that the people who, I guess it depends on what you measure in terms of belief. If you measure whether someone ticks a box to say, yes, I agree with this religion, or no, I don't, compared to perhaps if you had questions like, do you attend church every week? And, you know.
Now, I think there's another thing going on as well, and I think it's that a lot's happened in the last 40 years in terms of church, which hasn't necessarily been great. So I mentioned the scandals, the abuse. You know, I'm not surprised that people have lost their trust in Christianity if that's what it's about. So that's just disgraceful, that's awful, that's dishonouring to Jesus. How angry must Jesus be about that? And he was angry with the religious hypocrites in the first century, so I assume he's angry with us if we're like that today. But all that says to us is what I tried to say tonight. We need to get back to who was Jesus and what did he say, and is that good? Because there's been some awful things that have happened in the Australian church.
Yes, so not just looking at the people who claim a particular thing, but rather the original Christ.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, that leads us, I guess, to one of the questions we have here, which is, again, talking about the behaviour of people and the choices that people make, and that is, why have people committed violence in the name of Christianity? What would you say to why, if Christianity is relevant and if it's about loving God and loving your neighbour, why have people in the name of that committed violence?
Yeah, and I would say not just Christianity either, right? There have been lots of people who've because of their belief in a religion, have committed violence or an idea. Yes, that's right. It doesn't even need to be a traditional religion. Coming back to Jesus, I think, again, is really helpful. There's no sense within Jesus that you are to take up a sword and commit violence against your fellow human being. I have to say that I don't think that's true of other religions. So I think Islam and Muhammad would, I think, potentially lead you there, depending on how seriously you take his claims in the Quran. But Christianity, no. And so, again, I think I have to say it's an abuse. So I think that's an answer. Yes. And I think it also says to us that throughout history, Christians have got it wrong. Again, you've got to come back to who is Jesus, what did he say?
And what did God say about the world? I mean, he's told us that humans are sinful and,
absolutely,
and broken. And I guess, some of that really shows.
So it shouldn't surprise us, that even Christianity's been distorted in that way.
One of the other questions we have...
I might just switch microphones there. This keeps falling off me.
One of the other questions that we have through the Slido is, how can Christians be relevant in the 21st century? So perhaps when we live in a world where things, we're not 2,000 years ago, where maybe you needed to, and particularly in cities, we're not living in a time or a place where you needed to pray for rain so that your crop would be able to be plentiful so you could harvest it and feed your family, nor do we need to pray moment by moment or day by day for our health needs to be met or our need for shelter to be met. A lot of us, I guess, live in a time where that's not the forefront of your mind, perhaps. So if you're going out and talking to the world and trying to convince people of the need for Christianity, the relevance of Christianity, how can Christians, or how can we do that?
Yeah. Well, what I tried to say tonight is I think it's about Jesus' claims, and he talks to us about some big things. Yeah, our purpose, what's life all about. But he talks to us about death.
Yeah.
And it's something that we all have to face. And here is Jesus saying, I've got the answer. Now, if it's true, it's absolutely wonderful and good. I think that's relevant. It's something that it's humanity's biggest enemy. It undoes everything. Yeah. And here's Jesus saying, actually, I've dealt with it. And I think back from death is all of the suffering in life.
Right.
Okay. Jesus is saying, I've come to reverse it. I've got something on my ear. Just looking like a goose here, that's all. Thank you. And so I think that is incredibly relevant.
Yeah.
If someone turns up to a broken world, shows enormous compassion and integrity, and says, I've come to fix it, I'm going to reverse it, and then proves it in his miracles and resurrection, I think that's worth listening to.
Yeah.
That's what got me in. I thought, wow, if that is true, that is the best news ever.
So I guess you're saying that we're all going to, like you did in your talk, we're all going to die.
Yeah.
I mean,
you don't need to believe the Bible for that. Yeah?
I could walk out the door and, heaven forbid, end up in a car crash, not make it home. Yeah. Either of us could... Yeah. Anything could fall from the ceiling right now. We just do not know. Yeah. And because of everyone is in that position in the whole world, and everyone needs an answer or to think about that.
Well, I think it's a universal question, isn't it? Why is there suffering? Why is there death? Apart from a whole lot of other questions about purpose and meaning in life, that's what makes Jesus relevant, because he has some very substantial answers to that, and I think he's backed them up in history.
So then one of the other questions that's come through is, do people need Jesus in order to be good? Can there not just be people who are just good people? Do you need Jesus to be good?
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm not sure that that's not primarily why Jesus came, and thankfully you don't need Jesus to be good.
Yes.
Because we'd be in quite a bad place. So... although I'm hoping that as people become Christians, they become gooder. But it's not always the case, is it? No. Sometimes you meet Christians and you go, I don't know whether I like that person.
Yeah, that's right. That's like the nature of sin, I guess you were talking about, or the nature of brokenness.
That's right. We're still broken. But yeah, thankfully, I think God in his kindness, and the Bible talks about this, that he's spread his goodness across the whole world. And he's done it even for people who completely reject him. So I think that's just part of God's enormous kindness.
So he gives people good things.
Absolutely. He gives people good things. And people are able to do great things for humanity. So you do see a lot of goodness in the world. Of course, not just from Christians. But I still think that's part of God's gift to us. Now, that's a different thing to whether you're related, you have a relationship with God or not. So a good friend of mine, when I was working these things out, he said to me, it's a bit like different ships, the pirate ship or the ship that's doing good. Yeah. God's ship, if you like, people in relationship with God, and then the rebels, the pirate ship. The pirates can still do good. They're still mates with each other. They're still obedient to the captain. And yet they're flying the rebel flag against God.
Right, yes.
And I think that's really helpful, because it says both camps are capable of good things, But where is your allegiance? Are you with God or against God? Are you a rebel or your friend?
Or your friend. And I think also, I guess what you're talking about is a little bit is that's assuming that there is a standard for what good is.
Sure.
So if we're saying, how do we know what good is? Well, we would say we know what good is because God is good and might tell us what good is.
Yep.
And then I guess if you're coming from another perspective where you're thinking it's all an accident, it all just happened, what standard then would you use for what good is?
It feels like there's something inbuilt in us. Doesn't matter what faith we have, to know right, wrong, good, evil. Where does that come from? I guess is a good question, is what you're pointing at. Certainly the atheistic perspective, so when I put up Dawkins' quote, I think if that is true, if there is no meaning, it's all random, it is hard to say that is wrong, that is evil, and that is good. No, more consistent is it's just a random accident. It just is. And you have to live with it. And I find that personally quite cruel.
But logically consistent to that.
It is logically consistent, although I think not many people would go down that path. They'd say, no, that is evil. So I don't think, we don't speak about evil very much these days, but I notice, or sin, doing things that displease God. But I do notice even in the media, evil gets mentioned when it's just unmistakable. Yeah. So when the Bali bombings happened, which is 20 years ago now, evil was mentioned. That was a dreadful evil. I remember one of the fathers who lost his daughters in the bombing saying, the men who did this deserve to go to hell. And you think, we never talk about evil or hell, but when we see it like that, we go, no, that's right. Yeah, it's just interesting. Yeah.
So if we don't need Jesus to be good, and if I think, look, I'm a pretty good person, I know what's right and what's wrong, I follow what's right, my family follows what's right, I do things that could be called objectively good, why do I, of course then I'm going to heaven, right? Like why do I need anything more than that?
The Bible addresses that in a couple of ways. So first of all, the pirate ship analogy, you're on the wrong ship. So you've completely opposed the Creator and you're a rebel in his world. That's a problem in terms of relationship. The other thing is, I think if we're honest with ourselves, our standard of good and how good we think we are is not quite as good as we think we are, if I can put it that way. We live up to our standards. Probably not even that. Yeah, not even. So I think if we put the bar low enough, we'd probably get over it 50% of the time. And we all have that pass mark. The problem is, thankfully, God is a holy, perfectly good God. That's the only way you'd want him to be. And if that's the case, then his standard is miles higher than mine, and I will not meet it. And so the good news is, well, none of us will meet it, but the good news is that's why Jesus came to die. Jesus came because we can't be good enough. There is the perfect man dying in our place, suffering for our sins so we might be forgiven, so we might have a relationship with God.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Yeah. So we can't meet the standard. We could set our own, and even then we probably wouldn't meet it.
I think that's true.
And so in that sense, we're not good if good means perfect.
Totally. Yep.
So if Jesus is the only way to God, why do Christians pray to God and not Jesus? Or why do they pray to God if you need to go through Jesus?
Okay, you might need to tease that one out a bit.
That's the question. I guess what I'm imagining might be behind that question is thinking that Jesus and God is separate rather than God, rather than the idea of the Trinity that we have, and that Jesus in God in sending Jesus to the earth tore that veil, I guess made it possible for humans. I think if you look at the history of God's people, the history of Israel, we saw that in order to talk to God, people had to slaughter animals to repent for their sin. They had to talk to someone who could go into a temple. They couldn't all go, the priest. They couldn't all go in there. Certainly God wasn't approachable, and Jesus changed that. So I guess if you could unpack a little bit, if Jesus is the only way to God, why does it seem like Christians still sometimes just try and have a chat to God.
Sure. So I think what Christians are trying to do, but maybe we're not doing this explicitly enough, is yes, we are coming through Jesus. So we only have access to God, the Father. The only way we do that is through Jesus. So you often hear Christians pray, "Dear Heavenly Father," in Jesus' name.
Yes.
Okay. So it's because of Jesus' death, because he's my priest, the one who represents me before God, I can speak to God, my Father. So I think that's the Christian way of addressing God.
So where there used to be a priest that you would go and talk to, now Jesus has done that.
Correct.
And we can talk directly to the Father.
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. If that doesn't answer that question for that person who put that up, please feel free to come back and clarify. Another one is there are many other beliefs in the world. So how could you be sure that Christianity is the right one?
Sure. That's a great question. I guess you've got to start somewhere. So I want to encourage you to start with Christianity. I know I'm going to be biased, but I think it's worth starting with Christianity because again, back to Jesus' claims, he's saying, "I'm the only way to life. I'm the only way to God. I am the only God." And so if you can either say that Jesus is true or eliminate him, that's probably a great place to start. Because of the exclusive claims that
so
Jesus
either
makes.
he was right or he was
Yeah. So it's back to what
nutty,
you were saying before about he's either a liar, a lunatic, or he really is the Lord God. And I think that's why it's worth starting with him. I reckon it's also probably, depending on your circumstances, a bit more accessible to investigate Christian things because of the country we live in, the freedoms we've got, but perhaps the accessibility to a church or this kind of event, why I believe, a Bible.
Yep.
So I want people to start with Jesus.
With Jesus, But I guess then you're kind of going into how do you know that that's correct? So yes, you've got historical documents that might be accurate. That's a really long time ago. So adding to that question then, the Bible's printed in lots of different languages. There's lots of different versions. We're talking about writings that were, put on parchment, thousands and thousands of years ago.
Really
how can you really know that what was written then is still what we read now?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I think it's a very relevant question to Christianity. If it's not actually true, Christianity falls over. It is a historical claim. It's a faith-based in history, a religion based in history, which is not the same for every other religion, right? So there's certain belief systems. It doesn't matter whether it's actually true or not. Christianity is different. And so that's why, again, I think it's worth exploring who is Jesus, look at those historical documents. And I think it's helpful, we do it in our court system, what is true beyond reasonable doubt? Okay? Can you know anything 100%? Probably not.
We'd have to know everything to know.
Exactly. And you can't live that way.
No.
But can you know it to a sufficient level to say, yes, I can trust? And I think that's how we decide whether anything is true. So you think about the issues we're dealing with at the moment with vaccinations. At some point, we're going to have to make a decision, personally, beyond reasonable doubt, am I happy with this?
Yes.
I can't know everything, but I know enough. I'm going to go to the GP. I'm going to get my vaccination.
Yeah, that's. I mean, even there's another standard of truth looked at in different court systems is the burden of around the balance of probabilities. Is the balance of probabilities, is it more probable or less probable?
So I'd encourage that kind of investigation. And I think as you look at the historical claims of Jesus, the reliability of the Bible, you start to realise it is beyond doubt, beyond reasonable doubt. There's a massive amount of evidence there that is very weighty towards the claims of Jesus. And if you took an honest look at that compared to any other historical figure, I think you'd say, no, Jesus stands up. What I notice, though, over the years is that's not actually the sticking point for us. The sticking point for us is what Jesus says. It's not whether he actually lived and said those things and did the miracles, died and rose again. He's actually making a claim on my life. He's actually calling me to change. That's offensive. Like it's great news, but it's also an affront to me.
Yes.
It's like, I want to live life my way. I'm in charge.
Yeah.
And here is Jesus saying, actually, I'm God. I'm in charge. You need to come with me. You need to trust me. You need to live for me. That's offensive to us as human beings. I find that's the sticking point, not the historical data.
Yeah.
But it is worth investigating the historical data, because you need to know and you need to have confidence that the words that you're reading in the Bible and the other historical documents are actually the words of Jesus, and Jesus really did live and die and rise again, so that you can make a judgment call on that.
Yeah.
And lots of things to say. Like, so just briefly on the Bible, I think as you look into it, you realise, it's been translated in different languages, but over the 2,000 years, our English version today goes back to the earliest and best manuscripts we've got. So
In all historical documents.
That's right. So it's not 2,000 years worth of changes and Chinese whispers, where it moves from one person to the next. We've gone back to the earliest manuscripts. Some of them are early 2nd century, and the number of manuscripts we've got and how early they are, and they're the two tests for historians to work out whether it's reliable or not, is extraordinary and better than many other historical figures at that time. So if you look at those historical tests, I think Jesus comes up really brilliantly.
So you can go back to history and really look through and critique, and it's quite robust and holds up.
I mean, even what I said tonight about, even if you just take the Bible aside, there's a whole lot we know about Jesus from other histories. And to my mind, if Christianity is true, if what the Bible's saying about Jesus is true, then I would expect to see it in other documents. Again, that's not true of other religions. It's not true of the Quran. So the Quran's version of Jesus and his life, which is a small part of the Quran, is not backed up by any other historical claim outside the Quran. And I don't think if you're Muslim you'd say that it needs to, because you say the Quran is true and that's it. But the New Testament documents are historical documents backed up by the histories of the time. And even so, again, take the Bible aside, you've got those other documents. And the 2nd century, you've actually got the early church fathers. So it's the pastors, the church leaders of the 2nd century, writing to one another. And as they're writing to one another, they're writing to one another about parts of the Bible. You can actually piece together almost all of the New Testament through their letters. So there's just this whole range of evidence outside of the Bible itself, apart from the Bible being historical
as well. So before we come back, I've got a couple of extra questions, but I'm going to pause for a sec so that we can pop up the QR code for the Google form, just in case there's anyone watching who wants to ask questions in another way or be contacted to follow up in another way. So you can connect with us through this code. It takes you to a Google form. In that form, you'll be able to pop down if you want someone to send you a Bible. I've been hearing a bit about how accurate and historically credible it is. And while you're doing that, and if you have any other questions, continue to send them through. You mentioned before about miracles occurring. And I guess, so thinking, let's say, the record that's in the historical texts is what the people who were there at the time wrote. How do you know what they observed was correct and not some big hoax or some big mass hysteria?
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things to that. The first thing, it's really interesting. We're sceptical about miracles, and I think we've been sceptical, let's say, for the last 150, 200 years. But prior to that, not.
Yeah, true.
And the further back you go, the more they go, Jesus did miracles. We're not arguing about that. We're arguing about, was he from God or was this of the devil? Is this magic? So there's early documents. Some say he was a magician. Right. He's tapping into the dark side.
Yeah.
And then those other documents, other than New Testament, talk about Jesus doing extraordinary things. Talk about him doing miracles. So there's no question on the miracles when you go back. Now, how do we know that they wasn't a hoax? I think that's about eyewitnesses and the community, which is, again, how you do any journalism or any history. And so I think the same is, how do we know we have the right details about World War II? You know, we weren't there in the trenches. Someone wrote a history of what happened, and I take it history works as part of a community. So out of World War II became documents that said this is what happened, and they were accepted by the community who were there, and then they were passed on to us. Yeah. Now, not all the documents are historically accurate, right? So World War II, I've forgotten the author's name now, but maybe 15, 20 years ago, caused a massive stir because he said that the 6 million Jews that were killed was a hoax, incredibly offensive. But his book still exists, but it's on the outskirts of history.
So you could still find it in 400 years' time and go,
absolutely,
hey, maybe it is a hoax. Yeah.
That's right. But the main body of literature on World War II confirms the facts that happened. Now, I think that's what's happened with Jesus and the first century. There's a set of documents that went forward, including the Gospels, but others, that this is what we're saying happened. And it's written within the time frame of people that were actually there.
That were there, yeah.
That's what changes it, I think.
The difference. Yeah. Unlike things, I think Alexander the Great, his conquests are written about hundreds of years later.
Yeah.
And we don't question.
That's right. And historians would still say, as far as they can see, it's accurate.
Yes.
But the claims of Jesus and the history of Jesus in the Gospels is amazing in that it was written and recorded within the lifetime of people to go, hang on a minute, that's not what happened, or that's what happened, and that's how they deciphered.
Yeah.
Because there are Gospels and there are false histories out there. Yeah. Like there are for World War II.
That's right. Yeah. I remember reading something about the way that people recorded information in that point of time is so different to how we might record information. Okay. Like if I wanted to talk about something that happened in my life, now I might write down a piece of paper and then, I forgot where I put it, or, they are age old, it's not anywhere unless it's saved in 3 places. But they had such a strong tradition of ensuring that their documentation, because they didn't have computers and technology, was really robust. Yeah. So if someone wanted to understand a bit more about that and know more about the historical accuracy of the Bible, where could they start to look?
Yeah, well, I think we might, if they can leave their details or...
in the Google form.
Yeah, we might need to send some information.
Yep, so we can send some things to you via email, or even have a conversation about where to start as well.
Yep, that's right.
Yep, send some resources.
Yep, happy to do that.
Yep. They're all the questions that we have that have come in at the moment. Yeah. So we'll get ready to finish up. Michael, thanks for talking to us. I think it's a big topic. It's a big thing to think about. Where all of us watching right now are currently alive. And so it's a question we all need to answer, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Is this relevant for us? What's going to happen to me when I die? What happens when I die? And what boat do I want to be on? Do I want to be in the rebel ship waving the rebels flag, which is anyone who I guess is not, we were talking before, you could be going about your business being a good person and still be on the rebels ship.
Yeah.
According to God. Yeah. So we have a limited time to answer that question. So we'd encourage, I guess, more thought about that. If this has sparked any other thoughts for you and you want to talk a little bit further, again, you can use that Google form to do that. We have a gathering every Sunday. We do a live kind of like this at 10 a.m. You can also watch it later if 10 a.m. doesn't suit you. But if you want to tune in live, you can do that, where you hear us go through different parts of the Bible each week and start looking at and talking about and building a picture of who we see Jesus to be and how we respond to that given who we see Jesus to be. You can jump onto saltchurch.com. You can link in via YouTube if you search Salt Church. And also we're active on Facebook and Instagram, I believe. We just need a few more reels, perhaps. Sure. Get people flicking through their reels and tuning in that way. It's great to have you with us tonight. Thank you so much for your questions. We hope that this has just been the beginning of a conversation for you. Have a good evening. Thanks so much.